The dawn of Operation Barbarossa shattered the fragile peace between Germany and the Soviet Union, unleashing the most massive land invasion in human history across the vast, unforgiving eastern plains. Millions of soldiers surged forward, caught in a brutal machinery of churning steel and fire, which transformed the once peaceful landscape into a desolate, smoking wasteland of mud and blood. For the German Wehrmacht, the initial momentum promised a swift and decisive victory against enemies, but the sheer scale of the Soviet interior quickly began to swallow their advancing columns. The mounting ferocity of the Red Army resistance soon turned the campaign into a grueling, relentless war of attrition that tested the limits of endurance for every single man involved. As the oppressive summer heat finally gave way to the biting, lethal cold of winter, the invaders found themselves trapped in a logistical nightmare that defied all their strategic planning. The ideological clash between Nazism and communism fueled a conflict of total, absolute annihilation, where every small village became a desperate fortress held against the encroaching tide of death. Every mile gained was paid for with thousands of lives lost in the deepening snow, creating a landscape defined by frozen bodies and the hollow echoes of distant artillery fire. Soldiers huddled in shallow trenches, their breath crystallizing in the frigid, unforgiving Russian morning air, while the horizon burned with the constant, flickering light of burning homes and shattered dreams. The machinery of war ground on, indifferent to the suffering of the millions caught within, its iron wheels churning through the mud that had become the graveyard of imperial ambitions. Officers barked orders into the wind, their voices swallowed by the vast, empty, white expanse, as the realization dawned that the swift victory they craved was slipping further away daily. Supply lines stretched thin across the frozen tundra, vulnerable to the sudden, savage partisan strikes, leaving the frontline troops isolated, hungry, and shivering in their inadequate, thin cotton uniforms. The snow began to fall in earnest, a thick, white shroud covering the broken tanks, the discarded rifles, and the countless fallen soldiers who would never see their homes again. This was no longer a war of movement, but a static, agonizing struggle for survival, where the frostbite claimed as many victims as the relentless, whistling shrapnel of the shells. The commanders in their distant bunkers studied maps stained with coffee and the sweat of anxiety, unable to comprehend the true scale of the catastrophe unfolding on the frozen ground. Each day brought new reports of lost positions and shattered divisions, yet the order remained: hold the line at any cost, regardless of the mounting toll on the human spirit. The soldiers, hardened by months of slaughter, moved like ghosts through the swirling, icy mist, their eyes reflecting the hollow emptiness of a world that had abandoned all human mercy. They fought for every inch of frozen earth, driven by a fanatical, dark, and destructive ideology that demanded total sacrifice from those who were merely trying to stay alive today. The silence of the night was frequently broken by the sudden, sharp crack of snipers, reminding everyone that death was a constant companion in this vast and lonely, frozen hell. As the winter deepened, the machines began to fail, their engines freezing into solid blocks, leaving the infantry to face the oncoming waves of Soviet counterattacks with only their rifles. The landscape became a testament to the folly of man, a graveyard of broken steel and shattered lives that stretched endlessly toward the horizon under a cold, uncaring gray sky. The struggle for the East had become a crucible, burning away the remnants of humanity, leaving only the raw, primal instinct to survive another day in the biting, lethal cold. Every village was a tomb, every road a path to destruction, and every soldier, a victim of a war that had long since lost all semblance of strategic, rational purpose. The snow continued to pile up, bearing the evidence of the carnage beneath a layer of pristine white that mocked the darkness of the deeds committed upon the frozen soil. The German Wehrmacht, once confident in their superiority, now faced the grim reality of defeat as the winter wind howled through the ruins of the cities they had sought to conquer. There was no glory left, only the biting cold and the weight of the dead, pressing down on the survivors who struggled to maintain their sanity in the frozen waste. The ideological fervor that had started the invasion had been replaced by a hollow, aching despair that permeated the very air they breathed in the desolate, war-torn Russian interior. History would record the scale of the invasion, but it could never truly capture the suffering of the individuals who were caught in the gears of this massive, destructive machine. The Eastern Front stood as a monument to the consequences of unchecked, radical, and aggressive ambition, a warning written in blood and ice for all future generations to witness clearly. As the winter dragged on, the soldiers waited for an end that felt increasingly impossible, their spirits broken by the relentless, crushing weight of the war they had helped unleash. The frozen crucible had claimed them all, leaving only the silence of the vast plains, where the wind whispered the names of the lost to the uncaring, cold, winter stars. As the tide of war shifted, the Soviet Union mobilized its immense industrial and human reserves, launching massive counteroffensives that systematically ground down the once mighty German war machine with relentless, crushing force. The battles of Stalingrad and Kursk served as the definitive turning points of this brutal conflict, where the strategic initiative slipped permanently from the desperate grasp of the overextended Axis forces forever. Exhausted, undersupplied, and facing an increasingly hardened Red Army, the German lines began a long retreat. They moved back toward the heart of the Reich, leaving behind a trail of broken, frozen machinery. The Eastern Front became a harrowing gauntlet of scorched earth and relentless pursuit through the bitter cold. Every mile of the retreat was marked by the thunder of artillery and the screams of soldiers. The German soldiers trudged through deep, unforgiving snow, their uniforms tattered and their spirits utterly shattered. Behind them, the Red Army surged forward like an unstoppable tide, reclaiming their scarred, ravaged homeland. The landscape was a desolate graveyard, littered with the twisted metal of tanks and frozen bodies. The retreat was not merely a tactical withdrawal, but a chaotic collapse of a grand ambition. Supply lines had long since vanished, leaving the soldiers to scavenge for food in ruined villages. Fear permeated the ranks as the realization took hold that the war was truly, irrevocably lost. The once confident invaders now looked over their shoulders, dreading the inevitable arrival of the Soviet tanks. The conflict culminated in the final, apocalyptic struggle for the heart of Berlin, the capital city. Street by street, house by house, the city was reduced to rubble in a final, desperate stand. The immense human cost left an indelible, jagged scar on the continent, marking the total end. The Third Reich crumbled into ash and dust, its ideology buried beneath the weight of defeat. A new global order emerged from the wreckage, defined by the sheer devastation of the conflict. The silence that eventually fell over the ruins of the East was heavy and deeply profound. It served as a grim, haunting testament to the catastrophic scale of the destruction witnessed there. Millions had perished in the snow, their stories silenced by the cold, indifferent hand of history. The vast plains, once the stage for glory, were now merely a quiet, empty, frozen void. Survivors looked upon the ruins of their world, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the loss. The machinery of war had finally stopped, leaving behind only the echoes of a lost generation. Diplomats and leaders would soon redraw the maps, but the land itself remained forever, fundamentally changed. The scars of the Eastern Front would endure for decades, etched into the very earth itself. No victory could truly justify the price paid in blood, suffering, and the total annihilation endured. The frozen crucible had finally cooled, leaving only the bitter, chilling memory of total, absolute war. Winter winds howled across the desolate steppes, carrying the ghosts of those who fell in battle. The iron tracks of tanks had carved deep, permanent furrows into the frozen, unforgiving Russian soil. Villages that once thrived with life were now nothing more than charred timber and hollow shells. The sheer scale of the mobilization required to sustain such a conflict defied all human comprehension. Factories worked around the clock, churning out steel and ammunition to feed the insatiable front lines. Every citizen became a gear in the vast, grinding machine of total war and national survival. The German command, blinded by arrogance, failed to account for the sheer depth of Soviet resolve. As the lines buckled, the desperation of the retreating forces manifested in acts of brutal cruelty. They burned what they could not carry, leaving a path of scorched earth behind them daily. The Red Army, fueled by vengeance, pushed forward with a momentum that no defense could halt. Artillery barrages turned the horizon into a flickering, hellish landscape of constant fire and smoke. Soldiers huddled in shallow trenches, praying for an end to the relentless, soul-crushing bombardment of shells. The distinction between frontline and civilian territory blurred into a singular, vast, lethal zone. Hunger became a constant companion, gnawing at the resolve of men on both sides of conflict. Frostbite claimed as many lives as the bullets, turning limbs black in the biting Arctic air. The collapse of the German front was systematic, a domino effect of failed logistics and morale. Commanders issued orders that no longer held any connection to the reality on the ground. Berlin stood as the final crumbling monument to a dream that had turned into a nightmare. Smoke billowed from the Reichstag, casting a long, dark shadow over the dying, broken city streets. The final surrender was not a moment of peace, but a cessation of the absolute carnage. Europe lay in ruins, its cities broken, and its people mourning the loss of their kin. The geopolitical map was rewritten in the ink of blood, setting the stage for decades ahead. Historians would later struggle to quantify the sheer magnitude of the suffering endured by millions. The memory of the Eastern Front remains a chilling warning against the hubris of total war. Nature slowly began to reclaim the battlefields, covering the craters with wild, untamed green growth. Yet, beneath the grass, the remnants of the conflict remain buried, waiting to be unearthed again. The silence of the plains is a heavy shroud over the secrets of the dead soldiers. No monument could ever truly capture the depth of the tragedy that unfolded in the East. The world moved forward, but the echoes of the guns still resonate in the collective memory. The frozen crucible remains a dark lesson in the fragility of peace and human civilization itself.